Hear me? Okay. All right. My name is Karen Ranzi, and this is the New Jersey Raw Food Support Network. I bring in speakers from the raw foods movement each month, and we have a whole bunch of great speakers lined up for the rest of this year and for 2009. I myself have a book coming out in a couple of months called Creating Healthy Children Through Attachment Parenting and Live Food Nutrition, and I'll be doing a seminar here in May of 2009. If anybody's interested in my website or asking me any questions, my website is www.superhealthychildren.com. And for today, I am so thrilled to present my longtime friend and mentor, Dr. Douglas Graham. This is a real treat that you have today to be able to hear Dr. Graham and ask him questions. I've known Dr. Graham, I think, going back maybe 14, 15 years. When I met him, when I was visiting Florida, I met him at his chiropractic office. And ever since then, he's been traveling all around the world, telling people and talking about health and wellness. And that's just been a huge passion for him. He's also worked with some leading celebrities, from tennis star Martina Navratilova to Ronnie Grandison of the New York Knicks, and Mark Victor Hansen, the author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, and many Olympian athletes, such as Doug Dickinson, who's a runner, an Olympian runner. So Doug has been all around and spoken to so many people all over the world, and every time I've heard him, I have learned something new. I am so excited and proud to have him here. So, Doug, we'd love to hear you. Let's welcome Doug.
Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. We should have a really great time today. I am honored to be here and excited to be here. This is the last stop on a 8-week U.S. tour, so I get to go home and see my wife and family, which is really something I'm looking forward to as much as being here and getting to see all of my stateside family as well. But it's a pleasure to be amongst people so excited and so interested, and I want to make this day as much as I possibly can be for you. I do have a few ground rules that I always set at the beginning of every presentation, just so that you have a better sense of what to expect and what not to expect. And one of those is that I won't play doctor from the stage. I don't know you well enough to diagnose or prescribe to people that I haven't yet met. I think it's incredibly disrespectful to your health for me to make assumptions. And so if you ask questions, and there will be plenty of time for questions, we'll dedicate the last third of this presentation to your questions. As you ask your questions, please understand that you're either looking for a generic response to a medical situation, or there simply isn't going to be one. I can't actually play doctor from the stage. Also, I'm not really here for any reason to speak about other of my colleagues within the health field or outside the health field. I'm not here to talk about people. We're going to share ideas today. We'll talk about a few methods and modalities for getting done what it is you're hoping to get done in your life, helping you reach your personal health goals. And if you want to know why someone says what they say, ask them. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm more than happy to discuss, however, the science behind any concepts that other people may have put forth. And so it's not a matter of sidestepping any issues. I'm perfectly happy to talk about the issues, but I'm not going to talk about the people. It's simply not what we do. With that covered, I will take a moment just to let you know that I'm now celebrating my 30th year of eating raw foods. I'm not going to tell you that it's been all raw. That was not the case at the beginning. I couldn't figure out how to go all raw. In fact, I spent the first few years explaining to people that all raw as a goal was really just setting yourself up for failure. And why do that? You know, why not just set yourself up for success? It seemed logical at the time. I didn't know anybody that was eating all raw. I had spoken with all the raw leaders over the first few years. I was very enthusiastic. I spoke with all 5 of them at the time. And that's what there was. Then there really was no more than that. There was a few people. You could send them a letter. You could actually write mail to them. A couple of them had telephones. Some of them didn't. And that was the method used to reach people back then. But I spoke with them, and all of them had the same thing to say. They said, well, yes, if you want to maintain fitness and health, the way to do it best is on raw foods, but our work has invariably been helping sick people get well. And we know how to help sick people get well, but we don't know anything about working with athletes or healthy, fit people. That's really out of our league. Completely out of our league, and so we know that if we take sick people and we take them off what it was that was making them sick, that they're pretty reliably going to get well. And we know that if we take people off of what was making them sick and we put them on a diet where there's very few calories, almost nothing at all, they can eat all the leaves they want, but not much more than that. And if they really want some variety, maybe we'll juice some leaves for them. But if we put them on an exceptionally low-calorie diet, that they'll tend to get well much more rapidly than if we put them on a high-calorie diet. And so technically we're avoiding the legal ramifications of fasting anyone, which a lot of the politicians and the political forces of the world would tend to think of it as starving someone. They don't really recognize the differences between fasting and starving, which are not the same thing in any way. But we can avoid all of that legal hassle while we're feeding people as much as they want of greens, basically. And several things predictably will happen. A, the people will tend to get well because they've gone off of the foods that were making them sick. B, they're not going to eat much. These are people who haven't been eating greens intentionally for their entire life. They take the lettuce off of their hamburger. And so if we feed them only greens, they're going to eat very little anyway. They'll try for a week or so to just not eat at all. But it's their choice. We're feeding them as much as they wish. And then eventually what we see is they get well, and they do so by eating greens, which leads to another misconception, at which point the people will blame the greens, or they'll give credit to the greens for their getting well, not really understanding that the reason they got well was because they stopped doing that which was making them sick. Well, this is certainly an interesting thing, and it works, and it still works to this day, that we can get people well by reducing their calorie intake. We can get people well by taking them off of that which was making them sick. We can get people well by giving them foods that they're not going to eat, so they essentially go into a fasting state anyway for a period of time. And we watch that this is literally the default mechanism within the body. It is natural for people to get well. We've all been sick at times. We've all gotten well. It's what we expect to happen, is that, oh, we'll get over it. We'll get well. Whatever it is that we're suffering with, oh, we'll get better. And lo and behold, this is what happens, as well as we'll blame whatever it is we're doing currently. Even if we're doing 3 or 4 or 5 different things at once, we'll typically pick one of them and blame it. And so people will say, well, I started an exercise program and I'm really feeling so much better. And I go, well, is that the only thing you've done? They go, well, no, I quit smoking and I quit drinking and I'm eating much better and now I go to sleep earlier than I used to because I want to get up early and exercise. But it's the exercise that did it. And I take a slightly different approach to this entire concept. I think that health is the cumulative result of your lifestyle. Granted, all of us were born with certain genetic predispositions, strengths and weaknesses, but within those predispositions, health is the cumulative result of your lifestyle, as is ill health or lack of health. That there are different concepts in the healthcare system. There's a system that I refer to as the 4M system, that of monitoring and managing, medicating disease while we treat the symptoms. We attempt to suppress the symptoms. And this is fairly universal in the world of what is referred to as healthcare, which is really sickness management, or, if you will, patient management. There's another model which has to do with the cessation of cause, the participation in healthy substances, forces, influences, and conditions. And what we find is that when people literally cause health, health is the natural outcome. Health is the default state. And so when we're looking for health as an outcome, what we learn is that if we take care of ourselves as if we were a house plant and supply the proper substances, forces, influences, and conditions required for human beings to thrive, then thrive indeed is what we do. That not only is health the natural state, but that we can cause it. It's not a crapshoot. It's not a luck of the draw. Well, you know, it's just your lot. You open the window and influenza, and we don't know why health really happened. We understand more fully that we can create our health, that we are literally responsible for our own health. And this is a tough pill for many people to swallow, the concept that they can be responsible for their own health, or that they are truly responsible for their own health, in a world where responsibility has become something that basically we want to avoid at all costs. Nobody wants to be responsible, it seems, for almost anything in any aspect of life. And I'm not even going to go into the politics that are current, that exemplify the idea that people don't want to be held responsible or accountable for their own deeds or thoughts or words or anything else. We do know that health can be caused, and that essentially this is done by simply not causing sickness. The only other option at that point becomes health. When we look at health creation, we can either look at how healthy you are, or we can look at how sick you are. And one way or the other, we're going to come up with an evaluation of your health. Typically, in what is referred to again as the medical model, we look at how healthy you are. And we focus on how healthy you are. And that becomes your level of health. And so people will say to me, you know, except for my morbid obesity, I'm extremely healthy. Except for my diabetes, you know, I've lost my right foot and I'm about to lose my vision in my eyes, but except for my diabetes, I'm really healthy. Well, except for this cold that I haven't been able to beat for the last 3 months, I'm really a healthy guy. Inside our own heads, we understand that we're healthy, because this is the way we envision ourselves. This is the way all creatures envision themselves. We're doing the right thing at the right time, all the time. We learn to beat ourselves up. It's not natural for us to beat ourselves up. We've never seen a child, you know, reach in the crib for the little rattle or whatever it is that's hanging up above, or try to learn how to stand up, and when they fall down go, oh, I'm so stupid, I don't even know why I try. You know? I mean, kids don't do that. We had to learn to beat ourselves up mentally. But inborn naturally, it's our design to think of ourselves as always doing the right thing. People are always trying to be the best that they can. To think of ourselves as healthy and well and ageless. And so there is another way of looking at the world, which is to evaluate your health according to its weakest link, which I think is far more realistic. Tell me the weakest link in your fitness program, and I'll tell you how fit you are. Tell me the weakest link in your personal psychology, and I'll tell you how mentally healthy you are. Tell me the weakest link in your overall health program, and I'll tell you how healthy you really are. If we look at the strongest man ever in history, a guy by the name of Sandow, he was so strong he was called the Amazing Sandow. They used to wrap chains around his arm, and he would burst his biceps, and the chains would break off of his arm. He did the same thing, is wrap him in chains, and just go, and he'd pop chains. I mean, he was amazing. He bent iron bars. And when his aorta burst, he was dead in 4 heartbeats, just like anybody else would be. Jim Fixx was considered the fittest man on the planet back when such designations were made, and Jim Fixx literally wrote the model book on running and fitness, and had the cardio health of theoretically the best in the world. But when his aorta burst after a steak dinner one night, you know, he was dead in 4 heartbeats, pretty much just like anybody else. And if we look at these men and their overall health, they're obviously, all that fitness and all that strength didn't hold them in any particularly great stead. You're as healthy as your weakest link. And as much as we don't like to define ourselves in that way, it in many ways is really more realistic. I mean, does anybody here speak a smattering of some language or another? And great, and you can say, where is the bathroom, please, in some foreign language, or you can say thank you. But God forbid that you should actually start speaking to somebody in that language, because then they're going to start speaking to you, and then they're going to expect answers, and oh my gosh, if you have to give directions in the car while they're, I mean, that, you know, is a whole other situation. And we have to judge ourselves by our weakest abilities in that sort of a thing. You wouldn't want to, you know, if you speak a smattering of some language, would you want to start earning your living on it tomorrow morning? You know, based on that smattering, you'd be in serious trouble if you had to actually communicate to a group. And so in health as well, we have to look at a big enough picture, back off enough to say, well, what actually causes health? And there are a variety of parameters that we can look at that have to do with our overall health. Certainly understanding that the medical approach is somewhat lacking, because essentially what it gives us is a philosophy that says that the substances, forces, influences, and conditions required for health when you're healthy are different than those required to regain your health when you're sick. For instance, there's supposedly a war on drugs. The drugs will make you sick if you're well. But if you're sick, take drugs, they'll make you well. And we laugh, but most people buy into that completely. They actually buy into the concept that there's a war on drugs, that there's drug-free zones. I was driving through a drug-free zone not too long ago down in North Carolina on my way to visit some friends who lived right near the school. And her boy was now in that school. So I drove through the drug-free zone, got to her house, I was talking to her for a while. Where's her son right now? Oh, he's still at cross-country practice. She said, but I've got a problem with this coach, because the coach has told the boys on the team that he's going to make them practice so hard that they need to start taking aspirin every single day before practice. Before practice. He said, because there's no way that they're going to be able to train as hard as I want them to train without requiring aspirin to recover from that practice. And I'm going, it's a drug-free zone. The coaches are prescribing drugs before they're required. It was, I didn't even know how to come up with more words for this. She goes, yeah, you know, this is probably his last practice. I just don't like the whole attitude of this coach prescribing drugs for my boy. My boy never took drugs in his whole life, and now he wants to start taking drugs because the coaches are telling him to. It just seemed completely backwards. We know that in the same light that dairy is prescribed for kids. You know, tell your kids to drink lots of milk if they're well. But if they're sick and they drink lots of milk, it'll make them congested. So when they're sick, don't have them drink any milk. And I'm wondering, how does the milk know when? And we can go and look at many, many different aspects of these models, understanding full well that when you actually step back and look, that there's a lack of congruity. There's something missing there. And it's so much easier for us to point the finger at them than it is to realize that there's three fingers pointing back at us, and maybe we need to look at our own lifestyles and see how much congruity there is between what we know and the way we live. And where are those incongruities? And in fact, does working on those incongruities, eliminating them, getting to a point where you can look yourself in the mirror and say, wow, I'm totally congruent between what I know and how I live. Is that truly the type of personal development that you're looking to have happen? If it's not, that's perfectly fine. We understand that the health model literally defines health in the opposite way, suggesting that the substances, forces, influences, and conditions required for health when you're healthy are the same as those required for health when you are not healthy, but that those substances, forces, influences, and conditions must be modified to meet the needs of the individual each and every day, each and every time, at all times. And so there's times when you need more fitness activities, and there's times when you want more sun, and there's times where you want more food or less food, more sleep or less sleep, but that we all need sun and food and sleep and fitness activities. And that the conditions required for health can be listed, much like you would list the conditions required for the health of an African violet. And it just comes with a little list, and so do people. Our list is just a little bit longer. And how do we evaluate our health? It's as strong as the weakest link. It turns out, how many people slept last night? Some of you are too tired to even raise your hand. All right. Well, it turns out that, in fact, most of us sleep most nights of the year. And most of us move most days of the year. And most of us take care of a lot of the bases that are required for health, at least to some degree, each and every day. And when we look at our overall health package, for a great many of us, the weakest link tends to be food. Not for this group, for your neighbors, for your friends, for your relatives, because it's easier for us to look at their issues than to deal with our own. But today, we're going to look at our own, just a little bit. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm really here to get you to think. If I can get you to think, I've done my job. I'm not here to make enemies. I definitely would love to make new friends. But even more than that, I want to make a few points today. I want to get a few things across so that you can walk away with enough of an understanding to be able to make your own decisions in a healthy manner, in a manner that actually looks at 2 and 2 and comes up with 4. And I have to share for just a moment that a story that I heard the other day. One of my clients wrote to me, and she was very upset because her son spends half the time with her and half the time with Dad. And that's its own situation, but that's the reality. And they don't eat quite the same. Mom and Dad eat, in fact, quite differently. Mom's a raw fooder, Dad is not. Mom's a vegan, Dad is not. It leaves for a rather confusing situation for this little 3-year-old who has just turned 3, and he doesn't see that when he goes and spends a couple days with Dad, that he comes home and then he's sick after he comes home, that being sick with Mom was the result of having eaten with Dad. He doesn't see that when he's well with Dad, it's the result of having eaten with Mom. He sees it kind of, I mean, he's 3, how it's not as openly obvious to him. And the woman said something to me that I just thought it was incredibly funny. She said, I just don't know how to get the point across to my little boy. He just can't see enough to take 2 and 2 and come up with 4. And I wrote back to her and I said, he's 3! How do you expect him to come up with 2 and 2 is 4? He doesn't know what 2 and 2 is, let alone 4. Hallelujah. So it seemed like a joke, but yet at the same time I understood what she meant, that he can't really understand the consequences of his actions just yet. And it's a shame that he's the ball in the pinball machine at this point. But we have to be able to see the consequences, because really our concern has to be about consequences. Our concern is not so much about right or wrong, good or bad, as it has to be about consequences, the outcome. Where is it taking us? I don't know if anyone else had a difficult time finding this location today. It was a little tricky for me to get here. I only stopped and asked directions 4 times. But had I not stopped to ask directions and just drove, I'd still be looking. It has to be, I believe, it's incumbent upon us to take responsibility for our own actions to the degree that we can start to understand that we're responsible for the outcome, and that what happens to us is our own making, and that we can create health. You can do what all those people have been telling you to do for all these years and go to health. At least that's what I've heard them tell me. So we do this by working on our weak links, because this is where you're going to find the fastest progress, the most dramatic improvement. If we spend an hour in an English class, there's very few of us in the room that are going to be much better at English in an hour. But if we spend an hour on Swahili, we could all learn 5 times as much Swahili as we know now, maybe 10 times, who knows? I mean, I'm not sure, if you know 0, then it's harder to multiply the times, but you understand we could make huge progress in Swahili in a few minutes, not much progress in English in a few minutes. If we work on our weakest links, and that's why we see people make dramatic changes in their health when they make a dietary change, and they get all excited about it. I find it funny, though, that people make changes in their diet. They take the old highway, the change away from standard American diet. They go towards some macroneurotic direction, or back over towards a vegetarian thing or a vegan thing, all along the way going on and off various other superfoods and supplements and condiments and stimulants and irritants and wonder flushes and detoxes and cleanses, and eventually follow the route, lo and behold, patting themselves on the back for having arrived every step of the way through vegetarianism and veganism and raw foodism, and even getting there and being raw foodist and going, well, really I think where I'm supposed to go is breatharian. And I've done the math. I'm that kind of guy who finds myself with free time and enjoying math. I've done the math. Okay, there are 24 hours in the day, and typically I eat in total for less than 1 of those hours combined. It doesn't take me. I'm a relatively quick eater. My mom always tells me to slow down when I eat my food. I always tell her, eat more quickly, Mom. My dog eats really fast. I don't see the model in nature that says I'm supposed to eat as slowly as I can. But a separate issue, I eat for about an hour a day at the most. Very often only half an hour a day is all it takes me to consume my food. I'm not eating fast food, I'm eating instantaneous food at that point, and it goes down quickly. Which, you know, if it takes me an hour out of a day, that's only about 4% out of an entire day. And that means that 96% of the time I'm not eating at all, which makes me a 96% breatharian. It's not up to me to necessarily define what is a raw fooder. I don't even know if it's up to you necessarily to define what is a raw fooder. You'll know when a raw fooder looks back at you in the mirror. Until then, you're not one. And it's not so much about what you're eating, because a lot of people are eating an all-raw diet, craving cooked food. They're just waiting for the stimulus that's going to spur them on to going back to that cooked food. I mean, how many people have tried to go on a raw food diet and the next thing you knew they were back eating cooked food? Certainly happened to me. How many people gave cooked food more than one chance, even though it didn't get them where they were trying to go? I promise you, I was on the wrong road today, and no matter how many times I went down that road, it was not going to get me to Whole Foods Market. It just wasn't. It wouldn't have mattered how many times I went down that road. It wouldn't have mattered how many times I went down the complex carbohydrate route. It wasn't going to be health food. It doesn't matter if it's sold in health food stores. It didn't matter whether I air popped my corn or whether I deep fried my corn. It wasn't going to come out as health food. If we look in the dictionary definition of complex carbohydrates, the starches are by definition not bland. They are tasteless. Do you really want to eat something tasteless? No wonder we fail to follow the government recommendations to eat more carbohydrates, because they're telling us eat more complex carbohydrates. You might as well eat the box rather than the food that's inside. It would be more nutritious and probably have a better taste. It is not bland, it is tasteless. And so we fail to stay on a complex carbohydrate-based diet because the food is tasteless. We end up looking for more, and the granola bar turns into the honey raisin granola bar. It turns into the chocolate granola bar. It turns into the whatever it turns into other than just tasteless granola bar. And we find over and over and over again that people have a difficult time staying on a diet of tasteless food. I don't really care how motivated you are to take great care of yourself. The likelihood that you're going to do it while eating food that you don't like is really slim. You might eat food you don't like once, but not day in and day out make a diet of it. We just find that people go off the diet. And so what is a raw fooder? I don't know, but I do see the obvious. The obvious is that there is a portal of entry where people used to come in via vegetarianism. And they would open that door as wide as possible. And if you interview people, and I've done this, ask people, are they vegetarians, you'll find that a fantastically huge percentage of people describe themselves as vegetarians, but they qualify it in some way as, well, you know, I'm a vegetarian, but I eat fish. And I'm not exactly sure what kind of vegetable fish qualifies as, but I'm a vegetarian, but I eat chicken. I'm a vegetarian 6 days out of the week. I'm a ovo, lacto, pesco, pollo vegetarian. The door is pretty wide open to associate yourself as a vegetarian. But it snaps shut like an iron trap at vegan. You're either vegan or you're not. I mean, it's a pretty clear definition. People start going, well, is it honey? Is honey vegan? If honey, okay, what do I use instead? It becomes a very, very clear cut. You're either vegan or you're not. If that's the channel and then it channels through to raw food, it seems pretty clear cut. I mean, you're either raw food or you're not. You know, I mean, it's either raw or it's not. There's not like, it's like pregnant, you know. I mean, it's either pregnant or not. It's either raw or not. And how do you tell? Well, has it been heated? It becomes a little more tricky when you go, is it raw food or not? Because now you're trying to determine, is it raw, is it food? And is it food is a separate issue, different topic. I have digressed slightly because where we started out dealt more with consequences. And I still think at this point that it's worthy of understanding that consequences are really what we're talking about. The outcome is what we want to pay attention to. Not, hey, is it the right thing to do? That's a moral, ethical, emotional issue that could be evaluated in a wide variety of ways. Is it getting you where you want to go? What's the outcome going to be? What are the consequences? We understand that basically after a meal, you're only asked 2 questions. Did you get enough? Did it taste good? Those are basically the only 2 questions that get asked. Since we know that people aren't going to eat food that didn't taste good, taste becomes a non-issue in the decision-making about what am I going to eat tonight. Because I guarantee you I'm going to eat something that I like the taste of. And I can't imagine anybody doing otherwise. Oh yeah, maybe once in a while you might just eat something because you got to eat it. You're leaving on a trip tomorrow. It's the last thing in the house. You're going to eat it tonight. But for the most part, typically what you're going to do is you're going to eat food day in, day out that you like the taste of. And I like the taste of a mango. And I like the taste of watermelon. And I like the taste of a wide variety of types of grapes. And I like the taste of a banana. And I like the taste of all sorts of fruits and a great many vegetables. And I like the taste of a great many prepared foods. There's no question. I don't think that for the first 25 years of my life I was eating food that I didn't like the taste of. I was eating cooked food at almost every single meal. Although I have had people argue with me that cold cereal in the morning is raw. They go, we didn't cook it. I go, I know, but the cereal was cooked before it went in the box. And so was the milk before it went in the container. They go, oh. And I've had people actually try to explain to me that they consider their peanut butter and jelly sandwich to be raw food because they didn't cook the bread and they didn't cook the peanut butter and they didn't cook the jelly. And I'm not sure if that's innocence or ignorance or just wishful thinking. It doesn't really matter. I had a gentleman one time introduced to me at a party, and everybody was kind of standing at his coattails and really letting him be the center of attention. I was glad to meet him. Turned out he was a neighbor of mine who had just written a book, and he had written a cookbook. It was a gourmet cookbook, and everybody was really giving him the special treatment. So I told him, I said, oh, you know, I've written a recipe book. Maybe we could share recipes. That would be nice. And and he said to me, he said, but you're a vegetarian, aren't you? And I go, yeah, you could say that. He goes, there's no recipes in my book that are suitable for a vegetarian. And I thought how sad that was, that in an entire book there wasn't even one dish that would be suitable for a vegetarian. I mean, how much people ask me about variety, and they go, I mean, you only eat fruits and vegetables. Don't you miss the variety? And I go, well, I eat typically 200 plus different fruits every year. And I'm still waiting for persimmon season to come yet this year, but it's going to come, and it'll come in, you know, and it'll be one more variety, and actually it'll be at least 3 or 4 varieties of persimmon that become available. And I eat at least 50 different vegetables a year, and usually another couple of dozen nuts and seeds and fatty foods. And when you look at national averages, people are eating pizza 3 or 4 times a week, and people are eating burgers several times a week, and people are eating fried chicken several times a week. And how many meals are there per week? There just aren't that many meals per week, although I know there are some fast food facilities that are now advertising the 4th meal. Come in after midnight for your 4th meal of the day. But even then, there's only 20-something meals a week. And by the time the first 15 or 20 of them are predominated by just 3 foods, which, by the way, taste the same all year round everywhere in the country. Try and do that with a tomato. Try and get a tomato that tastes the same this week as it did last week. You just can't get 2 tomatoes to taste the same. And it's part of the challenge of being a creative raw food chef is you give out a recipe and then somebody else makes the recipe and go, well, I made that tomato mango soup and it didn't come out all that great. And I go, well, yeah, you weren't using tomatoes out of my back garden. It's a whole other thing. Or you weren't taking the mangoes off the tree, were you? Oh, no, mine were imported and heat-treated mangoes. I go, well, that's a completely different thing. And it's just one of the things we have to deal with. As I mentioned, you start taking better care of yourself, and an interesting thing happens. You start becoming more aware of and even more concerned about nutrition than you used to be. And it's actually, in my opinion, the opposite of how things should be. It seems to me like if you're eating really well, you don't need to be worrying about nutrition. We all the time talk about how all other animals, other than our domesticated animals, all other animals eat a diet of food that is species specific to them. They don't sway in any way from the food to which they are anatomically and biologically designed. And we don't see degenerative diseases. We don't see overweight. By the way, the latest on overweight is that a new brain chemical was discovered, and this new brain chemical essentially makes our bodies go haywire when we overeat. And there is some thought that perhaps it may actually even affect our desire and ability to overeat, and that with the proper drug treatment system, it may be possible to affect this brain chemical in such a fashion so that in future people won't overeat. I don't recommend holding your breath for this miracle of chemistry to happen. But we don't see overweight populations of squirrels and giraffes and lions. We see health issues amongst people that we're simply not seeing elsewhere. And yet, it seems like the more concerned you are about your health, the better you take overall care of yourself, the more you improve the quality of the food that you consume, the more concerned about nutrition you tend to become. And this, to me, is backwards. You really don't need to be concerned about nutrition if you're eating well. You need to be concerned about nutrition when you're not eating well. Those are the people. Your next door neighbor needs to be concerned about nutrition. It's time that we turn the tables by living in a way that was not only congruent with our own beliefs, but living in a way that the outcome was so clear, so apparent, that you can shine a bright light and set the example that you want other people to follow. Because we all know, and we've all had that experience of wanting it more for other people than we want it for ourselves, whatever it might have been. And in this case, the experience of health is something that we want oftentimes more for our family, more for our friends than we do for ourselves. It is perhaps the most difficult part of living a healthy lifestyle, is watching the people you care about the most choose not to do so and drive themselves down while you stand around helpless. But you're not helpless. You can actually do something. And the thing you can do is to set the example. You can be the model of health. You can be the picture. You can be the lighthouse. And the lighthouse doesn't really care if boats go on the rocks. It's just not up to the lighthouse to decide if the captain of some other ship wants to go on the rocks. But if the lighthouse light isn't on, we have a problem. It is important for us to live the lifestyle that we would like to show other people is the way to go. And it brings us to issues within the raw food movement, because we're telling people that the raw food movement is the way to go, that the raw food diet is the most nutritious diet, and yet we're not showing them results. We're showing them that we're finding it incredibly difficult to stay on this raw food diet. Well, if it's such a rewarding path, why is it so difficult? We're showing them that we're still having a tremendous number of health concerns. And what we've actually shown over the last 15 years is that the raw food movement is not growing. It has long since stagnated. 10 years ago, there were more raw food festivals in the United States during the summer of whatever that was, 98, than there were this summer. And the attendance was greater then than it was this year. We're seeing more people come into the raw food movement than ever before in history. And for a wide variety of reasons, primarily the internet has made our exposure so much greater. But we're also watching more people drop out of it than ever before in history. And so we're not seeing growth like we would like to see in any area of the raw food movement except for one: people following the 80-10-10 diet. We're watching people come in, start following the 80-10-10 diet, see how well it works for them, at which point it's very easy to keep working it. The more you have of your health, the more you're willing to do to protect it. And people come onto the 80-10-10 diet and they stay. And we're watching that segment of the raw food movement grow, which is very rewarding. And today I'd like to tell you just a little bit about how 80-10-10 came into being, what it is, why it's here, where we're going, and then we'll get on to other issues. Essentially, 80-10-10 is a catchphrase that delineates the guidelines for our consumption of macronutrients, also known as caloronutrients, those nutrients that supply us with calories. The nutrients that supply us with calories are protein, fat, and carbohydrate. That's the end of the list. And 80-10-10 basically was not my creation. The phrase was my creation, but the concept was not. The largest study ever done on human nutrition, the China study, came up with a conclusion that 3 to 9% of calories from fat was ideal for human beings. The longest study ever done on human nutrition, the Framingham study, 50 years in running, came up with a conclusion that the ideal level of consumption of fat for human beings was 3 to 9% of total calories consumed. Both studies and a variety of various health practitioners, sports physiologists, and nutritionists have come to the conclusion that when our consumption of fat exceeds 9% of calories, predictable health decline ensues. That predictable health decline can be denoted in a variety of ways. But primarily what happens is that our uptake, transport, and delivery of oxygen and fuel to our cells is impeded as the amount of fat in the diet rises. If the delivery of oxygen is impaired, we don't think as clearly, cells become prone to cancerous changes, and it becomes increasingly difficult for the muscles to function as well as the organs. When we deny fuel to the cells, again we see lack of muscular activity, chronic fatigue starts to become an issue. While the cause of those things, the excessive consumption of fat, has already been shown to result in the development of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, all digestive disorders, and candidiasis. By the time we take cancer, heart disease, diabetes, candidiasis, chronic fatigue, and all digestive disorders, and go, wow, if we just reduce our fat down to the levels 3 to 9%, as we've been shown by sports physiologists, health practitioners, doctors such as McDougall, health pioneers such as Pritikin, all of whom have run in-house programs that have helped more people get well than perhaps anyone in history, all of whom are recommending single-digit fat consumption. We see that coupled with the guidelines within the raw food movement from the originators of the movement who said, let's keep the diet down to nothing but greens at first, which is a fat content in the teens, but a calorie content that is so low that it becomes a program that is not sustainable. Something must be added in to a diet of greens. The average man would have to eat 40 heads of lettuce per day. The average woman 25 to 30 heads of lettuce per day. If they tried to live on just greens, a diet of just greens is not dimensionally possible. There's just not enough physical room to take in sufficient calories. Whether you wish to argue that the calorie concept is flawed in some way is a separate issue. There's no way to take in enough greens to maintain health, to maintain weight, to maintain satiation. Because we know for fact that the way to become satiated is to consume sugar. Your mama said so. Don't eat sweets before the meal, it'll spoil your appetite. If you want to become satiated, eat sweets. We understand this. We hear it all the time. People say, you know, how do you eat that much fruit? I eat a little bit of fruit and I'm full. It's like, how do you get to town hall? You know, how do you get to anywhere? You have to practice a bit. You have to develop the skills. Sometimes you have to ask for directions. What we see going on is that perhaps the cosmic joke of all of nutrition has been told so many times, and the punchline apparently never told, that people just keep asking the question and nobody even listens should you choose to answer. And the question is, where do you get your protein? Have you been asked? Have you tried to answer? Notice nobody listens when you start telling them? And it's a funny joke because people on a standard American diet eat about 11% of their calories from protein, and people on a vegetarian diet eat about 11% of their calories from protein, and people on a vegan diet eat about 11% of their calories from protein, and people on a raw diet eat about 11% of their calories from protein. And you wouldn't expect it to be any different because people on a standard diet are eating pizza, and people on a vegetarian diet are eating vegetarian pizza, and people on a vegan diet are eating vegan pizza, and people on a raw diet are eating raw pizza. Okay? And what we see happen is that if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's going to digest like pizza, and it's going to have the caloric-nutrient ratio of pizza, and there's really not a reason to be surprised by the fact that we're all eating the same amount of protein. The joke is that the people on the standard diet are defending their high-protein diet, and the people on all the other diets are defending their low-protein diet, and we're all eating the same amount of protein. Protein is literally a non-issue when we realize that no one in the room knows anybody with a protein deficiency. There's not even a medical name for protein deficiency. But research has been done. We know that mother's milk supplies roughly 6% of its calories from protein, while infants experience the largest and fastest growth spurt known to mankind, eating only 6% of their calories from protein. We know that the scientists who've studied this have told us that 3% of our calories from protein is sufficient. We don't know what the minimum is, but we know that 3% is sufficient. And we know that the health authorities tell us that 3 to 9% of our calories, so easy to remember because it comes up twice, that 3 to 9% of our calories from protein is more than enough. Why do they hedge above 3 or 4 or 5 when we know for a fact we're not going to grow as fast as children? Well, there are influences such as the dairy industry and the cattlemen's industry which definitely affect what is said. And this is why we hear things like cut back on salt and cut back on fatty foods rather than eliminate salt from your diet or eliminate red meat from your diet or any other meat. And so, although we're told 3 to 9% is sufficient, there's every reason to believe that 3 to 4, 3 to 5% is actually the range we're shooting for. And that more will result in negative changes such as autoimmune conditions, the arthritides, various joint irritations, and inflammation throughout our system wherever you are genetically prone to it. We have proven that 3% is more than enough. Over and over and over through millions of people, because when you consume heated protein, the proteins change. We know they change because there was a nursery rhyme when you were a kid. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't shove Humpty Dumpty back inside that egg again. Or something like that. There was a TV commercial, this is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. And we saw that as soon as the egg hits the frying pan, it changes. And it's never going to be Humpty Dumpty again. We know that something happens when proteins are heated. You would have to open a college level or beyond physiology text to find out what that something was. Because for the last 50 years it has been defined as denaturing. And we know if you consume denatured alcohol, you die. I mean, that's what happens. You die. We know if you open up a dictionary and read what is denaturing, denaturing, oddly enough, although you've learned all these rules that you're not supposed to do in giving definitions, the definition of denatured typically in most dictionaries is changed from its original nature. Well, duh. But nonetheless, there is more to the definition, and it will usually include making it toxic, unusable for human consumption. So we denature all proteins by exposing them to heat, and a specific thing happens. I call it a British thing so you can remember it. Bonds are affected. Enzyme-resistant bonds are formed. What does this mean? It means that when we go to digest denatured proteins, that we can break them down into proteols, smaller parts. And we can possibly, again, through the magic of enzymes, break them down into smaller parts called polypeptides. But at that point, enzyme-resistant bonds have formed, which make it impossible for us to break those polypeptides into their component dipeptides or their individual amino acids. We have a problem with cooked food because the nucleus of every cell of everything alive on Earth contains proteins. There's protein in everything you eat, and when you heat it, the proteins have become denatured, making them not only non-usable to us, but also toxic. How do we know this? We know this because when you consume heated foods, our body attacks the food with what is called a normal response by physiologists, because it happens after every meal, even the ones that they eat, because they're eating cooked food too, and they haven't looked outside of that norm to see what happens when you eat raw food. Very rarely has it been done. But what we find is that a phenomenon known as the white tide occurs, where your body generates a massive change from the normal white blood cell level of 2 to 3 million. The white blood cell count surges after every cooked meal and goes up to closer to 18, usually 16 to 18 million for a period of time, and then it drops back down. So what we see going on when we see a blood parameter go through such a dramatic surge is something very unusual, because when we typically look at blood levels of almost any nutrient or any factor, what we find are extremely tight parameters. If we look up blood calcium and we find 9 to 11 is the normal range, we look up blood pH and we see a range that is typically in tenths or hundredths of a percent, not big range. Very tight, 7.42 to 7.44, and that's about the entire range of normal blood pH. We look at almost any of the parameters. Temperature, and we go, oh, what's normal temperature? 98.6, boom. We don't, I mean, a few tenths, 99 is considered fever. Very tight parameters when it comes to our anatomy and physiology as a rule. And then we look at white blood cell count, we go, oh yeah, 3 million's normal, 18 million's normal. We don't have a clue what's normal is essentially what they're saying. Anything that happens is normal unless it goes down really low. That's not normal. That would be considered either really, really, really sick because you have used your white blood cells so dramatically, so much of the time, that you've finally gotten to a point where your need for blood cells, white blood cells, has exceeded your ability to produce them, and the count is going down dramatically, and you're in trouble. Or a really low white blood cell count would be considered really healthy. You've got a clean system, and you don't need to be producing so many janitors. And until we ask people more questions about their lifestyle, we couldn't just go, oh, well, my white blood cell count is 1 million. Does that mean I'm really healthy or really sick? Don't know. It's like saying a man is 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. Is he built like a triangle, or is he built like a sphere? And we don't know until we know more information. You would just have to know more information. So not only do we understand that when we consume heated proteins that they are toxic because we respond, our body responds with an alert, a warning, an emergency response to those toxins. But we also know that they're not useful to us. We can't make use of them. We can't break them down. What does happen is that those large protein molecules, the polypeptides, still find their way into our bloodstream. They still find their way into our lymphatic system. And they have to go through the lacteals, the portals from the digestive tract into those fluid circulations. And by doing so, by forcing large molecules through small entry points repeatedly over time, we damage those entranceways. They become less discriminating in what they allow through. And we end up with what is known as leaky gut syndrome. Leaky gut syndrome meaning that all sorts of things that aren't ever supposed to find their way from your digestive tract into your bloodstream are going to start going there, and you're going to begin to develop a host of negative responses, symptoms, and eventually diseases based on the fact that you don't have the ability to discriminate at the entry level from digestive tract to bloodstream. Once again, proving a simple point that while the standard American diet is at least 11% of calories from protein, and there are people who intentionally consume a great deal more than that, bodybuilders, etc., and people who would like to simulate the results of bodybuilders by eating what they eat, not realizing that if in fact it was the food that made the bodies get big, then all those bodybuilders would be in kitchens all the time and never to be found in gyms. But what they are proving to us is that very little protein is required because most of what they're consuming is non-viable. It is in fact toxic. And that very little is required for them to do what they're doing, which we already showed by the fact that babies grow on a diet of 6%. In end, what we're saying is that the scientists, the sports physiologists, the nutritionists, the longevity experts, the noetics experts, the people who study our intellect, and a wide variety of health practitioners have shown us repeatedly that a diet of 3 to 9% of calories from protein and a diet of 3 to 9% of calories from fat gives us our ideal response. It's still plenty wide enough to work with, meaning that we are designed to consume an absolute minimum of 80% of our calories from carbohydrates. What kind of carbohydrates? Very simply, we're designed to consume carbohydrates from whole food sources because we understand that whole foods are more nutritious than their refined counterparts. There is a reason that complex carbohydrates are called complex, and it's got to do with chemistry. But it's easy to remember that complex carbohydrates are simply too complex to digest, and that we are designed to digest simple carbohydrates. How do we know? Because that's what babies look for. Babies put everything in their mouth. We've seen it. We've been told they do that in order to explore their world. Is that really how you explore your world, with your mouth? No, you explore your world with your hands and with your eyes. Over 90% of all of our sensory input comes in through our eyes. Babies put things in their mouth to find out if it is food. And if it tastes sweet, it is food. And if it doesn't, it is not. We're sweet seekers. We have sweet tooth for a reason. You cannot control it. You cannot deny it. It'd be like trying to deny the fact that you've got to pee now and then. Your bodily functions are going to win out. And we see it happen over and over, that people eat a diet that's roughly 40% of calories from carbohydrates. They go on a raw food diet and learn to eat a diet that's only 20% carbs. And the next thing you know, they're craving carbs, and they go back to complex carbs. Has it happened to anybody here? You tried to eat raw foods, the next thing you know, you're eating complex carbs. Bread, rice, pasta, potatoes, corn, call your name. Can't seem to figure out why you can't stay raw. You're drawn back into that complex carbs. It happens. We see it happen. It happens almost every time to almost every person who tries to restrict their simple carbohydrate intake. Because, as I say, we're designed to eat more than 80% of our total calories from carbs from whole foods of a simple carbohydrate nature, because we're not designed to eat foods that are tasteless. We have taste buds for a reason, and the taste buds on the tip of your tongue sense sweet. That's what you're looking for. We know sweet satiates us because at the end of every meal we've been trained to eat a meal that didn't satiate us in order to wait until the end of the meal so that we could have sweets at the end that would satiate us, so we could finally walk away from the table satiated, because otherwise we're going to walk away from the table looking for something, typically looking for something sweet. Have you ever finished a meal and then started looking around for something sweet? Sure, always, every meal. Until you consume enough fresh fruit to meet your caloric requirements you're basically missing the boat on what is healthful raw food eating. Because fruits and vegetables are the health foods. We know the science is in. You heat proteins, we have all the problems already mentioned. You heat fats, they become carcinogenic. You heat carbohydrates, they become caramelized, and this is carcinogenic. It made headline news in 2001 that when you heat carbohydrates, they become carcinogenic. Went around the world in a day on headlines. And I knew that as of that day, all human beings would stop eating complex carbs. I'm still a firm believer that with enough information, people will make better decisions. But sometimes we have to be able to link the outcome with the practice. And this is difficult. In the world of nutrition, it's exceptionally difficult. Nutrition has to be the softest of the soft sciences. We like to think of nutrition as being a science, but it's literally a soft science. There are no hard edges. It's not physics. It's not math. And at the end of math and physics, you've gotten to the end of the hard sciences. You can use a little bit of math in nutrition, but nutrition is spooky because it's mostly not even about food. Certainly sunlight is a nutrient, and it's not food. Certainly your attitude at a meal affects your digestion, and it's not food. A tremendous number of factors. Sunlight is a nutrient that's not food, but it affects your calcium metabolism. There are thousands, if not more, factors in our lifestyle that affect our digestion, our nutrition, our uptake, our absorption, our elimination. Try going with no sleep for a week. See what it does to your digestion. We understand how to tell the quality of foods, and yet we don't always have the terminology to really express it well to other people. So let me give you a bit of that. Whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic plants. Those are the qualifiers that determine whether what is on your plate is of optimum nutrient value for you or not. Whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic plants. If you can look at your plate and go, you know what, there needs to be more whole food on there, make the improvement. There needs to be more organic. It'd be better if this was riper. Anybody who's ever bitten into an unripe persimmon knows what I'm talking about. It's better if it's riper. Whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic plants. Eat simply at meal times. All creatures, when given the option of sufficient food, will eat one food at a time when they're hungry until they're full. All of the anthropoids will do that. The grazers won't do that necessarily, but grazers invariably have multiple stomachs. All grazers have multiple stomachs. We're not grazers. All creatures can catch their food easily and quickly, no matter what it is. Pelicans don't take much time dropping down on a fish. Lions don't take much time when they pounce on an antelope. I'll tell you what, I can sneak up on a raspberry in no time flat. But I wouldn't want to have to hunt down a rabbit. That would be tough. Whole, fresh, ripe, or organic plants. These are the parameters. Eating simply at meal times, typically one food at a time when we're hungry till we're full. Eating variety during the course of the year for nutritional sufficiency. Eating a diet where more than 80% of your calories come from whole food, simple carbohydrates. People go, but isn't that too much sugar? Isn't too much sugar bad for you? Yes, too much sugar is bad for you. Too much of anything is bad for you. That's the nature of the phrase, too much. There was recently a television show where a big deal was made about some raw fooders who have an issue known as orthorexia. They're obsessed with eating well. And the TV show made it out to be that eating well was the problem, not the obsession. It was the obsession that's the problem. You're not supposed to have obsessions. There are no healthy obsessions. It was the obsession with eating well that was the problem, not the eating well. But that's TV for you. We're designed to take good care of ourselves. We all think we take good care of ourselves. Ask your next door neighbor, how do you eat? And they go, oh, I eat really well. I eat healthy. I really watch what I eat. A wide variety of possible phrases. Only the, who would you call him? The character would say, well, I take food in my hand and I put it in my mouth. That's how I eat. But if you ask people about the quality of their diet, people will all tell you they eat well. Everyone likes to think they eat well. This is why we rename foods. We rename foods to give them imaginary characteristics that they don't really have. Peaches have shoulders, and mangoes have cheeks. And potatoes have eyes and ears on corn. And the skin and the flesh and the meat of fruit. We see a wide variety of flesh-eating names put into our consumption of fruits and vegetables so that the guilty don't feel so guilty. They tell us that meat has juice. Man, I've watched all those TV commercials where the juice man sells his juicer. He never ever put meat in his juicer to get out meat juice. Juice doesn't come out of meat. Lymph comes out of meat. Blood comes out of meat. And unprocessed urine comes out of meat. It's the urine that gives the meat the flavor. That's what gives the meat the flavor. Other than that, it's tasteless. We've been told to drink more water. Okay. Another way of looking at that is our diet is making us dehydrated. Our diet is so deficient in water that we have to add water. But if you watch TV shows, you watch all the nature shows on TV. At the end of the show, the animals all show up at the water hole, and they call a temporary truce while because everybody's got a drink. And you never, ever, ever see anthropoid primates at the water hole. We're not really designed to drink. Not in that way. We can if we have to, but we're not designed to. I mean, imagine it. All right? Here you are, naked, in the jungle. You walk out into the open savanna, naked. Now, granted, because you're naked all the time, you're not as aware of it as you would be if you were just naked right now, standing in front of all of us. Yeah, you'd be really aware of it. So you don't feel all that naked, but you're naked. And you go to the water hole. And it's kind of sandy down by the water hole. So you get down on your hands and feet, or your hands and knees if you don't mind getting sandy, and then you put your face in the water. Well, there's a part of you that's not in the water. It's sticking up in the air behind you. Vulnerable, essentially. And that's when the alpha male is really keeping an eye on you. because all the other guys are saying, hey, here's my opportunity. Alpha male can't protect all of them at once. And you have an interesting phenomenon going, because it's really difficult to drink water out of a lake. Have you ever tried? Stick your face in water and drink? It's not easy to do. Yes, you can cup up some water and take a little to your hands if that's your way. But that's not even easy, because you have to get into the water and then you make mud, and it's all just kind of awkward. Unless you don't mind drinking muddy water. We're not really designed to consume that water, though, because we never see any of the anthropoid primates come into the water hole. We're designed to stay well hydrated through our lifestyle, which doesn't include things that make us thirsty. What makes you thirsty? Well, eating dehydrated food is going to make you thirsty. And eating toxins will make you thirsty. So if you eat dehydrated toxic food, it will make you incredibly thirsty. 8 to 12 glasses of water per day worth of thirst. The medical model, as I stated, maintain, manage, monitor disease, and then eventually medicate. 4 M's. They say, rather than eliminate the toxins from your diet that are making you thirsty, they say, let's maintain the disease and we'll monitor it and we'll manage it through drinking more water. And when eventually your kidneys fail, we'll give you some medicine. Our need for water, or lack thereof, is a clear and obvious delineator of how we are designed to comport our way through the jungle. We eat a diet of simple carbohydrates because they tend to be satisfactory of our nutrient needs. We recognize our nutrient needs in the same way that we recognize our food needs. We're looking for sweet and juicy. Interesting that the word carbohydrate implies that we hydrate ourselves when we consume carbohydrate. And again, I've watched the juice man do all of his commercials, and I never saw him take a loaf of bread and shove it through the juicer. We're being told eat more complex carbohydrate, but you can take a sack of rice and run it through a juicer. There's no hydrate in a sack of rice. You can take any of those complex carbs and run them through a juice extractor, and you're not going to get any juice at all. Where's the hydrate in those complex carbohydrate? It's not there. It's not accessible to us. We're living in a world where we're beginning to become aware, just the edge of awareness, starting to look over at us, that we conceivably may have some effect in the issue of climate change. Now, it may be that it's not us at all. Maybe just the sun's getting bigger and we're all going to die. And such is life. Or the sun's getting bigger and we're all going to have to figure out something like move to high ground. Because if the water level rises 15 feet, the people living on the ground floor in Manhattan are going to be very wet. And Florida will completely disappear and things like that. So it may be that we have an effect, though. And a tremendous number of people are saying, you know what, if it's us, we need to do something about it. They've identified 3 factors. Just 3. Only 2 of which are being talked about. 1, our use of our cars. Okay, our use of our cars. Driving our cars produces a fair amount of greenhouse gas. 2, our consumption of animals. Turns out that the methane that animals produce is something like 19 times more powerful of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And so by producing animals that generate a tremendous amount of methane, the animal industry is actually hugely responsible for human production of global greenhouse gases. The one that's not being spoken about, cooking food. Every time you light a fire, you're producing greenhouse gases. So we've got three factors. Would you like to put them in order? Which produces the most greenhouse gases? Driving our cars, animal industry, cooking our food. Which is number 3? No. Animals. Animals are typically number 3 by most estimates. Some people have said 2, but most people have said animals. Number 3. Number 2? Cars. Number 1? We're producing more greenhouse gases on a global scale through cooking our food than through any other human influence. Do we care? How responsible do we really want to be as adults? For some people, it is that time of year when we go, it's time to reevaluate our life, the new year is upon us, and I'm going to live a more responsible life next year. Maybe part of that would be that I'm going to stop being the Exxon of today. In 73 and 75, Exxon staged not only a series of oil spills, but also a series of false oil shortages. People waited in line. There was rationing of gasoline. You could buy it on alternate days. And the T-shirt of the day was Exxon. We are the problem. We have the opportunity at this point to say that we know enough to decide, are we going to continue to be the problem, or are we going to be the solution? Which high ground are you going to shoot for? There are a wide variety of studies that have shown that if people become vegetarian for animal rights reasons, that they eventually lose it and go back to eating a very standard diet. That if people become vegetarian for health reasons, they eventually lose it and go back to eating a very standard diet. And if they become vegetarian for environmental reasons, that they eventually lose it and go back to eating a fairly standard diet. But that if they become vegetarian for all three, or if they eventually adopt all three reasons and start to see that it's a much bigger picture, that they stay with it and never lose their momentum. And the same has been shown for vegans, and the same is being shown for raw fooders. I understand that your health is important to you. But the health of the planet is important to everyone. Your family and friends and relatives and future generations are going to look back and go, they were still cooking food in 2008 and it was considered morally acceptable? How could such a reprehensible practice still be? We're saying we came out of the Dark Ages 600 or 700 years ago, and we're still suffocating ourselves. Look, I was eating cooked food for the first half of my life, the first 25 years anyway, and somebody asked me just recently in an interview. She said, you know, doing that raw food thing, it must be so difficult. She goes, is it really worth it? And I said, how stupid do you think I am? Do you think really that, look, I did cooked food for 25 years. And then I did raw food for 25 years so that I can make an honest opinion of which one was working better. At the end of those 25 years, I've continued with raw food. Don't you think I'm smart enough that if it was so difficult and not worth it, that I would have quit after this 25 years? Not gone on with it for another 4 after that? Obviously, it would have quit long before 25 years. It would have quit a long time ago. Of course it's worth it. It is so worth it that it's worth going against the grain, as it were, that the rewards are so fantastic, it wouldn't matter if I ever told anybody else about it. I'm honored that people ask, but I would be doing it for myself. I'd be doing it for my family. And I'm thrilled to do it for other people. We understand full well that we are designed in a very specific way, that every species has a diet that is particular to them. Our species-specific diet is fruits and vegetables, whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic plants. These are the foods that supply us with Goldilocks nutrition. Not too much of anything, not too little of anything. These are the foods whose nutrient content most closely mimics human nutritional needs. And it's through those foods that we obtain optimum nutrition. We've been sold a line of goods thinking that more is better when it is not. And when you finish patting yourself on the back for understanding that more is not better in the world of nutrition, do so with the full comprehension that you haven't got it yet. Because it's going to take over and over and over and over coming to the realization that more is not better in the world of nutrition before you finally even begin to adopt that. And people ask me, where do you get your this, and where do you get your that, and where do you get your next? And I tell them fruits and vegetables, and they go, is that enough? And I try as hard as I can to explain that more is not better. We understand that if you get too much vitamin A, you die. That if you get too much sunlight, it's extremely unpleasant. We understand that more is not better, but we also need to understand that when it comes to nutrition, two rather interesting bits of fact have come to light of late. Doctors admit that more than 95% of all human illness is nutritionally related. And the people who study nutrition have shown us, and they vary on this number, that 99 point, and they vary on that number beyond the point, but 99 point something % of all nutritional disorders are disorders of excess. Too much of what may be a good thing is not a good thing anymore. People say, well, then you're saying everything in moderation. No. Those things that are good for us in moderation. Those things harmful are harmful regardless of dose. We understand with those two little numbers, 95 and 99 point something, that 99 point something % of all human diseases are diseases of nutritional excess. And people are still wondering how to get more of something in order to correct nutritional problems. When in fact we know that most nutritional problems go away if we just improve absorption, if we improve assimilation, if we improve digestion, if we actually sit down, stop everything else, turn off the TV, have a calm, quiet meal without interruption, that will actually digest our food better. And we know that the food that we digest best is that which takes the least time to digest. The amount of digestive effort tells us a great deal about the quality of the food that we're eating. We know that you breathe in and the food is and the air is instantaneously in your bloodstream. We know that you drink water and the water is in your bloodstream in seconds. We know that while you're chewing on the first bite of peach, that many of the nutrients are absorbed into those tiny little capillaries under your tongue. That you literally start absorbing nutrients from the peach before you swallow. That's pretty quick. It's in your bloodstream before you swallow. We know that the water in fruit doesn't require digestion, that the vitamins and minerals don't require digestion, that the sugars don't require digestion. They're going to be used as is. That there is almost nothing left in a piece of fruit that requires digestion, while that fruit still does provide us, typically, with 3 to 9% of calories from fat and 3 to 9% of calories from protein, and the rest of the calories from carbohydrates. We're literally looking at Goldilocks nutrition, foods whose nutrient content most closely mimics human nutritional needs. That is ideal nutrition, not more of something. We've actually learned the opposite and then tried to lie with the words. So in the same way that the guilty were protected by changing the words and calling juice that which comes out of a steak and flesh that which you find inside a melon, in that exact same way, we again see it when we look at other aspects of nutrition. And so we can step back and say, oh yeah, I understand whole foods are more nutritious than refined foods. I understand that if I refine sugar cane down to just sugar, that it's calories without nutrients, what we call empty calories. And I know that if I use empty calories to make food, that I'm making junk food, or I'm making what is sometimes lovingly referred to as comfort food. You lose your job, you come home and you find out that your boyfriend left, and you're not feeling like you're having your best day when you remember that although you took the bus home that day, you drove your car to work. And you go, oh, I need comfort food. Who then reaches for health food? No one. No one uses health food as comfort food. But if what you're trying to do is develop yourself into a healthier person, when the times are least supportive of you taking great care of yourself are the times that you need most to take good care of yourself. Go take a walk. Get some fresh air. Say a few nice things to yourself. Come home and eat well on those days that are most stressful, most difficult to take great care of yourself, and develop yourself into a healthier person rather than at those times, hey, it's easy to take good care of yourself when it's easy. The mark of the person is, are you doing it when it's a little more challenging? If we can figure out ways to take better care of ourselves at the challenging times, we develop into healthier people. Right. This is an imperative concept to understand that more is not better. And it's easy to see when it's a bag of sugar in front of you. Hey, isn't a bag of sugar the highest source of simple carbohydrates? Isn't a bag of flour, refined white flour, the highest source of complex carbohydrates? That does not make it the most nutritious source because it's been stripped of all of its concomitant or constituent nutrients. And when calories are stripped of their constituent nutrients, we refer to them as empty calories, whether those calories come in the form of simple carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, powdered protein, another calorie source that could just as easily be stripped of its associated nutrients. It's bought in the health food store as if it was health food. You can buy a big can of protein powder. And we love to think of it as health food, when in fact we know it perfectly fits the definition of empty calories, as does your bottle of oil. Because a bottle of oil is nothing more than fat stripped of all of its constituent nutrients. The water, the fiber, the vitamins, the minerals, the enzymes, the coenzymes, the antioxidants, the phytonutrients, the carbohydrates, and the protein, And what's left is a bottle of pure fat. Empty calories. Fat supplies us with calories, stripped of its constituent nutrients. When you add fat to any ingredient, any other set of ingredients, any food, you're making a specific kind of food. And we call that food junk food, invariably. There's no other way to approach it other than empty calories result in junk food. We can also look at the reverse of this concept, for which no one has dared yet come up with a name. Empty nutrients. We like to think of nutrients being better for us the more nutrients we get. Therefore, what we say is we want to get the most nutrients per calorie. It makes sense to some twisted side of our perception if we let go of the idea of whole foods and then embrace refined foods. They're more nutritious. At that point, we could remove the calories from a food, remove the enzymes and coenzymes and antioxidants and phytonutrients and the fiber in the water, and end up with a little bottle with pills inside of it, full of magnesium or vitamin A. Nutrients without calories are just as empty as calories without nutrients. And the best source of vitamin A is not a vitamin A tablet. The problem is that we've made an association in our head where we equate the words best with highest. And until we can break that association, seriously break that association, we're going to constantly stumble over the same stumbling block, falling again and again and again for the next superfood, the next supplement, the next condiment, the next stimulant, the next irritant, the next flush, the next cleanse, the next whatever it is that comes down the pike because we're still looking. And of course, I compliment everyone on looking until you find what you're looking for. Invariably, however, what we also notice is that once people discover the 80-10-10 diet, they start eating a diet that is so heavily based in fruit that you're literally eating all the fruit you care for while having all the vegetables that you want. That you're being satiated in a way that was never, ever imaginable on any other program. We're telling people that the raw food diet is the world's most nutritious diet, but you got to have supplements to go along with it. While we understand full and well that supplements are not more nutritious than whole foods. They can't be. They're refined foods. We're telling people, in fact, an official body, a self-appointed official body of raw food leaders got together last year and determined that we must supplement the raw food diet or it is inadequate. Do you think any of the people in that official body happen to sell supplements? I would be just as ludicrous to stand up here and try and sell you supplements as they would be to try to sell you a raw food diet that was nutritionally sound. Of course their raw food diet cannot work. There would be no way to sell supplements. What I'm seeing is people coming in and out of the raw food movement as fast as it can happen. And the only part where people are sticking and accumulating and growing is within the 80-10-10 movement. It's growing fast. 80-10-10 is the fastest growing book, best-selling book within the raw food movement. And now outside of the raw movement as well, it is taking on momentum. Thanks to people like you spreading it around. I appreciate that, no end. The idea that we can have health without us actually taking responsibility for our health is just plain wishful thinking. The health fairy never dropped in on anybody. The idea that you're going to be physically fit at 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 without taking care of your fitness on a daily basis throughout your life is just plain wishful thinking. Fitness never attacked anybody. Nobody ever just woke up one day suddenly fit. What a great title for a book, Suddenly Fit. Don't do anything and just figure that someday they're going to come up with a pill and you can become suddenly fit. No, it isn't going to be that way. Health is earned on a daily basis, day in, day out. It's free, but it's earned. As is ill health. We have to make those decisions. In life, what we find is that a tremendous number of responsibilities are associated with freedoms. You want more freedom? Take on more responsibility. Is it a freedom that we have to become a burden to the rest of society? Personally, I don't think so. But it's not up to me to decide for you. Is it a freedom that we have to abuse ourselves thinking that somebody's going to save us later on? Can we use our financial method? Oh, I'm just going to piss away my money and figure somebody's going to give me more later. Can we use the same program with our health? I'm just going to destroy my health. I'm just going to let it dissipate. I'm not going to take care of myself because when I get to be 30 or 40 or 50, the medical people, they're just going to give me another kidney and they're just going to give me another lung and they're just going to give me some artificial knees and they're just going to give me parts and it's going to be a miracle. And the $6 million man, that wasn't a TV show. That was real. They're going to build me back up. And there's lots of other people who don't need their lungs. They'll give me theirs. Like, who's giving up their lungs? I think the onus of responsibility to eat well falls on us. I think that it's silly to think that we need to defend, is organic food more nutritious than conventional? Excuse me, prove to me that adding herbicide, fungicide, insecticide, rodenticide, or any of the other toxic chemicals that end in CIDE, explain to me, show me how that improves my life. Show me that my child's ADD or my sex life or my mental acuity is going to improve because I've added herbicides to my salad. No, I don't think so. I think organic is time-honored, and until somebody can show me that sides are acceptable, then I'm going to go with organic. I'm not here just talking about raw foods, folks. My field is health. Raw food makes up a very small part of the overall health package. And even in food, we're talking whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic plants. We're not just saying eat more plants or eat more organic or eat more raw. As long as it's raw, it's okay. Because that is not the point. The point is that if you take care of the quality of what you eat, the quantities will fall right into place for you. You'll get feedback from your body on how much of what to eat. And you'll be clear enough to be able to hear that feedback coming from your body. Rather than the people who go to me, well, I tried that raw food diet, but you know, after a while I just got a message from my body that I was having a chocolate deficiency. I needed a cup of coffee. My body told me that I really needed pizza. There is no body that tells it it needs pizza. It does not work that way. We understand that we're not only designed to thrive and to think of ourselves as thriving, but that this happens on a cellular level. It is not possible to become physically addicted to something that is harmful to us. You can become emotionally attached to seeking the shift in perception that accompanies using a substance. But you cannot be physically addicted to something that is harmful, that goes against all laws of physiology. If we look at the history, if we look at the ethics, if we look at the nutrition, if we look at any aspect of our anatomy and our physiology or our mindset, what we'll find is that fruits and vegetables are invariably appealing. Sorry for the pun. That we thrive at levels that many people are discovering have been heretofore unthinkable. We're rising beyond limits that we set for ourselves by becoming more than we knew we could. When we become healthy, we come as close to becoming super beings as people certainly possibly are capable of. We can rise above the average. We can rise farther than we've ever allowed ourselves. Is it some economical thing that stops us? No. Is it some environmental thing? No. In fact, we can raise more food on less space, do more good for the environment with more trees. Better for the farmers, better for the consumers. In every way, in fact, there is no downside to healthful living. The issue is, are we going to be honest enough with ourselves to really recognize that it's up to us to take good care of ourselves and nobody's going to do it for us? That the marketers aren't going to look out for us, and that no one has to suffer with your health or ill health except you, and that you are literally at the wheel of creating that health. Every once in a while I go into hospitals to visit sick friends and realize how unappealing it is to be in a hospital. And I know that we've converted our common conversations to include a tremendous amount of time spent talking about our illness, showing each other our scars, and talking about our visits to the doctors and the drugs they've given us. But in reality, sickness is not sexy. Health is appealing. Health is alluring. Health is magnetic. People who glow stand out. Everybody wants what you've got when you're healthier than they are. And the funny thing is that it's so easy. The funny thing is that once you've got it, you do practically anything not to give it up. It's amazing how much people spend in money and energy and time searching for a development of better health. And then when somebody says, well, look, it's as easy as this, they just keep searching in ways that they can buy it. How many people join fitness clubs and don't go? But if you ask them, oh, but I joined a fitness club, I spent the $600. That is not going to do it. You actually have to go. There's a molecular miracle that happens when you wear your sneakers out on the pavement, one molecule at a time. Health is a much bigger picture than just what you eat. But we have to pay attention to the weakest link. My experience has been that most of the time in the world of nutrition, we look for the micronutrient secret. We listen to the marketing rather to the sense and the science. We know that if you eat earth, it's defined as a disease called pica. And if everybody eats earth, they all have a disease called pica. But then we say, but that doesn't apply to if we eat earth and call it salt. It's still eating earth. And it is still toxic. The lethal dose is less than an ounce. And we go, the average American eats 1/50th of the lethal dose each day, except in the raw food movement where we eat 2 to 3/50ths of the lethal dose every day. We get told that salt is good for us because the sea salt has all the minerals that we need. And so it's better than most plants because it's got all the minerals we need. And they don't bother telling us that it also has all the minerals and elements that we don't need. That there's lead and cadmium, mercury, and all of the heavy metals to be found in sea salt. And just leave that part of the picture out. The things that we wouldn't find in our plant foods. And that it'll make you thirstier than anything you've ever consumed in your entire life. Oddly enough, if you drink seawater, you die of dehydration. The logic of removing the water from seawater in order to then consume what's left, the part that killed you, is definitely crazy. I'm not here, however, to spend time talking about what I'm not in favor of. I'm really here to tell you what I am pro, which is the consumption of whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic fruits. I'm in favor of us being honest enough with ourselves so that when we say it's whole food, it really is. As opposed to the marketers who've caught on to the phrase, from whole food. It's from whole food, as if that somehow implies that it's Domino's sugar is from whole food. All the refined supplements are from whole food at some point back in the processing. Let's get honest with ourselves and increase the percentage of whole foods in our diet. Increase the amount of raw. Increase the amount of ripe food. Let's put more fresh food on the table. Let's put more organic food. Let's start taking some responsibility. Grow a little bit of your own if you're concerned about the quality. It is so easy to be healthy. I find it hard to be sick. Sick is hard. People say, oh, being all that healthy, that must be so hard. Oh, taking care of your fitness must be so hard. Man, being sick is hard. We'll edit that out. I'm looking forward to watching the growth of the raw food movement as it develops into a healthier movement. Raw food for itself, great. I'm all in favor of people eating more raw food, and I understand that by default they're eating less cooked food. But I'm not seeing healthier raw fooders. I'm not seeing healthy raw food leaders. And until we're seeing a real rise in that type of leadership and in that following, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to demonstrate to other people that we have what they want. Man, if you want more organic food in the store, you got to buy organic food. The more you buy, the more gets replaced, the more shelf space it gets. The way to do that is to convince other people to get more of it. Whether it's whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic, plants, you want to see more of it on the shelf, higher quality for less money, convince other people that that's what they need to be getting. But as long as we're talking out of both sides of our mouth in the raw food movement saying eat more raw food but buy our supplements, the diet isn't accurate, it isn't sufficient, you've got to supplement, you've got to superfood, you've got to flush, you've got to cleanse, the body doesn't know how to heal itself. As long as we're giving a mixed message, it's never going to be accepted by the people who are smart enough to be able to see that. And it's never going to be accepted in the science communities either, because they're certainly smart enough to see that. The hugest difference among people is the difference between men and women. And nobody's suggesting that men should eat one diet, women eat another. As a species, our Goldilocks nutrition is very easy to describe. Health foods are whole, fresh, ripe, or organic, fruits and vegetables. End of story.